Human history is not only written in books, monuments, and the memories of nations. It is also written in the minds and hearts of the people born into each era. Every newborn enters a world already in motion, a world shaped by decisions made years before their first breath. Yet every generation also reshapes that world in their own image, influenced by events they never chose yet were destined to inherit. This is the great human relay, one generation handing the baton of civilization to the next, each carrying not only dreams and progress, but burdens, failures, fears, and unresolved questions. To understand the modern world, our behaviors, conflicts, dreams, and expectations, we must understand the story of our generations. Not just the familiar ones like Millennials or Gen Z, but the deeper roots, the greatest generation, the silent generation, the baby boomers, and all those who carried humanity through war, famine, industrial revolutions, and technological awakenings. Their values became the soil in which future generations grew. Their struggles became lessons. Their triumphs became myths. And sometimes, their mistakes became warnings. The story begins with the greatest generation, born roughly between 1901 and 1927. Those who grew up in the shadows and ashes of global upheaval. They were children during the First World War and came of age during the Great Depression. Hardship shaped them not as a temporary inconvenience, but as the defining truth of life. Hunger was not a metaphor. It was a daily reality. Work was not merely recommended. It was essential for survival. They learned discipline from scarcity, unity from crisis, and humility from the fragility of life. Their values were forged in fires that consumed continents. And then, as they entered adulthood, the world called upon them again. This time through the eruption of World War II. They fought across oceans and continents, in trenches, deserts, jungles, and skies. They saw suffering beyond imagination and courage beyond explanation. They returned home carrying both trauma and purpose, determined to rebuild a shattered world. They were builders of families, industries, governments, global institutions, and the foundations of the modern era. They believed in duty, sacrifice, responsibility, and collective progress. To them, freedom was not an abstract idea. It was something earned through blood and loss. Their children, the silent generation, were born between 1928 and 1945. They opened their eyes in a world struggling to rebuild. Their childhoods were shaped by rationing, uncertainty, and the sobering memory of war. When they walked to school, some of their teachers had fought on distant fronts. When they turned on the radio, nations were reconstructing both physically and spiritually. The silent generation grew up respectful of order, careful with words, and cautious in dreams. They watched the rise of Cold War tensions, nuclear fears, and ideological battles that threatened global stability. Yet they were also innovators in quiet ways. They advanced science, medicine, literature, and technology. They did not seek fame, they sought stability. They raised their voices not through rebellion, but through consistency. In many ways, they were the subtle spine of the 20th century, overlooked yet essential. Their silence was not weakness, it was discipline. Their caution was not fear. It was wisdom born from witnessing the cost of chaos. And then came the children of victory and prosperity, the baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. They arrived in a world ready to grow, ready to flourish, ready to breathe again. Nations experienced economic booms, suburbs expanded, consumer culture blossomed, and technology began advancing at unprecedented speed. Boomers grew up with television sets glowing in living rooms, cars filling highways, and a newfound belief that opportunity was limitless. They were raised with strong societal structures, clear hierarchies, defined gender roles, traditional careers, and the idea that hard work would reliably lead to success. But they were also the generation that questioned the old ways. They stood at the forefront of civil rights movements, feminist waves, cultural revolutions, and youth-led transformations. They expanded imagination, challenged old ideologies, and reshaped art, music, and politics. Yet they also built the systems that future generations would question. Systems of relentless economic growth, global industrialization, mass media influence, and institutional hierarchies. They believed in the latter: climate, build a life, stay loyal, retire with dignity. And for many of them, this worked. But the world they built, while prosperous, was not equal and not always sustainable. Their successes came with consequences: environmental strain, economic inequality, and cultural divides that future generations would inherit. From their world emerged the children of transition, Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. They came into a world where the optimism of the post-war era was fading. Recessions stirred. Divorce rates rose. Global conflicts simmered. Corporate scandals shook public trust. Technological change accelerated faster than society could adjust. Many Gen X children returned from school to empty homes, earning the name latchkey kids. Their independence was not a choice. It was a circumstance. They grew up with analog childhoods, bicycles, handwritten notes, mixtapes, and weekend cartoons, but entered adulthood in a digital world. They witnessed the birth of computers, the rise of video games, the first home internet connections, and the early stages of globalization. They became skeptical of institutions, but confident in themselves. They valued authenticity over image, practicality over idealism, self-reliance over dependence. While often overshadowed by the baby boomers before them and the millennials after them, Generation X quietly held society together during its most volatile transitions. They adapted to technological revolutions, navigated shifting job markets, and balanced analog wisdom with digital skill. They became the bridge, carrying lessons of the past into a world racing toward the future. And into that digital dawn arrived the Millennials, or Generation Y, born between 1981 and 1996. They were children of globalization, raised in a world expanding rapidly, economies merging, cultures blending, information flowing across borders. They were the first true digital natives, growing up with the internet humming softly in the background of their childhoods. Their worlds were shaped by computer screens, video games, early social media, school computer labs, and the thrill of connecting with people across the world with the click of a button. Yet their path was not easy. They pursued higher education only to graduate into economic recessions. They were promised stable futures but encountered precarious job markets. They chased dreams shaped by a world that changed faster than schools could prepare them for. Many millennials faced the burden of student debt, rising living costs, and industries disrupted by automation and globalization. They were labeled entitled for demanding work-life balance, mental health awareness, environmental responsibility, and human-centered progress. But these demands were not entitlement. They were survival strategies in a world that had shifted beneath their feet. Millennials became the generation of adaptation, learning new skills, changing careers, building side hustles, and navigating rapidly evolving technologies. They embraced diversity, empathy, collaboration, and global consciousness. They reshaped communication, business, and culture through social media, remote work, and digital influence. They questioned traditional norms not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. They saw the cracks in the old system and sought better ways. Then came Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2012. The children of smartphones, high-speed internet, and social platforms that opened the world like a digital window. They grew up scrolling, swiping, streaming, and connecting in ways unimaginable to earlier generations. Their classrooms blended with online worlds. Their friendships crossed continents. Their identities formed not only in physical spaces, but also in digital communities. But their world was not simply connected. It was turbulent. They grew up during political divisions, climate anxieties, financial uncertainties, and global crises broadcast in real time. They became emotionally intelligent out of necessity, resourceful out of urgency, and socially aware out of exposure to the world's realities from a young age. They are imaginative yet realistic, expressive yet anxious, connected yet often lonely in the vast digital ocean. They are also the generation most willing to challenge outdated norms, reject rigid labels, embrace diversity, and demand accountability from institutions. And beyond them lies Generation Alpha, born from 2013 onward, the first generation born entirely within the era of AI, automation, advanced robotics, smart homes, and immersive virtual environments. They will never know a world without on-demand knowledge, predictive technology, and instant connectivity. Their toys will be intelligent. Their schools will be hybrid. Their friendships will blend between physical and virtual. They will grow up with digital intuition as natural as walking or speaking. But they will also face unseen challenges, the psychological effects of constant connectivity, the pressures of performance, the acceleration of global change, and the need to navigate a world reshaped by climate realities, geopolitical shifts, and AI-driven economies. They will need emotional resilience, critical thinking, adaptability, and the ability to balance human intuition with technological power. And so, from the weary but unbroken resolve of the war generation, history slides quietly into the next era, an era shaped not by fire and fury, but by silence, structure, and a yearning for stability so profound it would define an entire demographic identity. The silent generation emerges not with the roar of tanks or the thunder of marching armies, but with the soft hum of post-war reconstruction, the steady rhythm of factory lines coming back to life, and the fragile hope that the world might, at last, calm down enough for ordinary people to simply live. These children are born between mid-1920 and the mid-1940, a period marked by the Great Depression, total war, rationing, strict social expectations, and the quiet terror of not knowing whether tomorrow will be better or worse. They grow up in households where voices are low, tempers are controlled, and emotions are tucked away like fragile heirlooms that no one is allowed to touch. Their parents, those hardened heroes who survive the battlefield and the breadline, teach them that life rewards obedience, caution, and discipline. Be careful. Don't cause trouble. Keep your head down and do your duty. These are not just phrases. They are a survival code, ingrained into the bones of an entire generation. Schools reinforce the same message. Work hard. Respect authority. Follow the rules. Success is predictable and linear. Careers are chosen early and kept for life. Freedom is a luxury, not a right. Creativity is a hobby, not a profession. This generation internalizes the idea that comfort is earned through consistency, not rebellion. They believe that stability is the most precious currency, more valuable than gold, more vital than dreams, because they have seen firsthand how quickly everything can collapse. But what makes them silent? Not literal muteness, but a cultural expectation of restraint. During the Red Scare and McCarthy era, speaking your mind, especially if your thoughts were unconventional, could destroy your life. Many learned to keep opinions private, to avoid risk, to survive by blending in. And yet, it would be a grave mistake to think the silent generation contributed nothing to history. Beneath their calm exterior, great revolutions were being prepared. They produced the early seeds of the civil rights movement. They wrote literature that cracked open the soul of America. They shaped music, from the soft harmonies of post-war big bands to the emotional undercurrent that would later erupt into rock and roll. They worked, built, and held society together with remarkable quiet strength. Still, culturally and historically, their greatest legacy was something far more powerful than personal achievements. They built the foundation on which the next wave of transformation would rise. They believed in order so their children could believe in possibility. They believed in discipline so their children could believe in expression. They believed in social rules so their children could one day break them. And break them they did through the generation we now call the baby boomers. When the war ends and the soldiers come home, the world enters a period of unprecedented optimism. Economies grow, industries expand, opportunities multiply, and in this new world of hope and prosperity, birth rates soar. The baby boomers, born roughly between 1946 and 1964, explode onto the scene like a tidal wave of new energy. They are raised not in scarcity, but in abundance. Not in fear, but in hope. Not in silence, but in the rising noise of television, advertising, music, and expanding freedoms. They are the first children to grow up with cartoons broadcasting directly into their living rooms, the first to be shaped by celebrity culture, the first to witness mass media becoming a defining force in society. Their parents, still haunted by memories of hunger and war, pour their hearts and hopes into giving their children the comforts they never had. Dream big, they tell them. Be more than we were. And the boomers take this encouragement and run with it. They grow up in the era of space exploration, where it genuinely feels like humanity is destined for greatness. They witness the moon landing, the civil rights struggle, the feminist movement, the anti-war protests, the sexual revolution, and the birth of modern environmentalism. They are bold, outspoken, ambitious, and deeply idealistic. They challenge authority. They question the rules their parents held sacred. They turn music into a weapon and culture into a battlefield. Where the silent generation whispered, the boomers shout. Where the silent generation obeyed, the boomers rebel. Where the silent generation preserved tradition, the boomers reinvent the world. And yet, with time, they too change. As they grow older, they evolve from rebels into leaders, from activists into executives, from revolutionaries into caretakers of the very institutions they once criticized. They enter the workforce at a time of stability and rising prosperity. They buy homes at affordable prices. They build families. They establish careers that last for decades. And they rise to positions of power during a period when the rules of society still favor predictability and loyalty. But the story of the boomers is not simply one of success. It is also one of contradiction. They grow up with dreams of a better world, but later generations often accuse them of clinging too tightly to the past, of resisting change, of benefiting from systems that became increasingly difficult for younger generations to navigate. They usher in prosperity, but also contribute to economic and cultural imbalances that will later shape the struggles of Generation X, Millennials, and Generation Z. And this brings us to the generation that stands at the crossroads of old and new, the one caught between analog childhoods and digital adulthoods, between stability and disruption, between tradition and transformation, Generation X. But before we step into the world of Gen X, we must understand the transition that creates them. The world from mid-1960 to early 1980 undergoes colossal shifts. Divorce rates increase, reshaping the family structure. Women enter the workforce in unprecedented numbers, creating dual-income households, but also leaving many children to become latchkey kids, returning home to empty houses after school. The economy becomes more competitive. Technology begins to creep into everyday life. Early computers, video games, cable television, and the seeds of the internet. Cultural norms loosen. Individualism rises. Trust in institutions declines after political scandals like Watergate. Economic recessions strike. The world suddenly feels less predictable than it did for the baby boomers. These conditions fundamentally shape the mindset, values, and emotional landscape of the next generation. The children growing up during this time learn independence not as a luxury, but as a necessity. They do homework alone. They make snacks alone. They solve problems alone. They entertain themselves with the limited tools available: books, television, early gaming consoles, and playground adventures unburdened by constant parental supervision. They are the last children of the free-roaming, unsupervised outdoor era and the first to taste the digital future. They grow up skeptical, self-reliant, and adaptive. They learn to navigate change because change becomes the only constant. They witness the shift from old morality to modern identity, from rigid roles to flexible lifestyles, from Cold War tensions to economic competition, from hierarchical institutions to emerging global connectivity. And within this environment, Generation X begins to form its identity, not loud like the boomers, not fragile like their children will one day be accused of being, but something else entirely. Resilient, resourceful, quietly competent. The stage is now set for the next major turning point in generational evolution. The moment when technology leaps forward and transforms everything: communication, culture, identity, work, relationships, and even the way humans understand themselves. This is where Millennials and Gen Z will rise, but is also the world Gen X must learn to navigate as they bridge the old era with the new. And now, the world is preparing for yet another transformation, one that will not only define Millennials and Gen Z, but also shape the destiny of Generation Alpha and the children beyond them. But before we leap into the digital age, we must pick up the thread of this story exactly where it leads next: the full psychological, cultural, and historical evolution of Generation X. Generation X enters the world quietly, almost unnoticed, as if history is too distracted by the loudness of the baby boomers and the rapid transformations of society to pay proper attention. Born between the mid-1960 and early 1980, they grow up in a time of transition. Too late to inherit the stability of the old world, too early to fully claim the digital saturation of the new one. They come of age in the shadows of cultural upheaval, political scandal, shifting family structures, and emerging technologies that are still too primitive to define them fully, but powerful enough to reshape their environment in subtle, irreversible ways. Many of them are raised in households where both parents work, not because it is fashionable, but because it is necessary. Others grow up in single-parent homes, a reality that becomes increasingly common as divorce loses its taboo. They return home from school to empty living rooms, open refrigerators, homework waiting on the kitchen table, and the quiet hum of a TV that becomes both a companion and a teacher. Independence becomes their default state of being, not a philosophy, not a rebellion, simply a way of life. They learn to figure things out on their own: how to fix the VCR, how to reset a tripped fuse, how to make dinner using whatever is in the fridge, how to entertain themselves without anyone organizing their time. This self-reliance becomes embedded into their personality as deeply as marrow and bone. They don't wait for someone to show them how. They try, fail, try again, and eventually succeed. This is why people later call them the do-it-yourself generation. Not because they wanted to be, but because they had no choice. Their world is shaped by contradictions. On one hand, they witness the tail end of the analog age. Film cameras, handwritten letters, mixtapes recorded from FM radio, rotary phones on kitchen walls, newspapers tossed onto driveways each morning. On the other hand, they're the first to experience personal computers, video games, cable television, early cell phones, and the birth of the internet. They live in both worlds, one foot in the past, one foot stepping toward a future no one fully understands yet. And because of this, Generation X becomes the bridge generation, the translators between two eras that speak very different languages. They grow up skeptical of authority because the authority figures they watch often fail them. Watergate shows them that governments lie. Recessions show them that job security is fragile. The oil crisis shows them that the global system is vulnerable. Corporations lay off loyal workers. Churches face scandals. Political leaders disappoint. Institutions that once seemed infallible reveal cracks. And through these cracks, uncertainty seeps into the cultural consciousness. But this skepticism does not make them bitter. It makes them realistic. They learn that the world is flawed, and because of that, they value authenticity over perfection. They prefer actions over promises, results over speeches, substance over image. They distrust hype, dislike being told what to believe, and value personal freedom above collective movements. They're the children of transition, too pragmatic to be idealists, too independent to be followers. Yet, beneath their quiet resilience, there's a longing that never fully leaves them, the desire for stability, for connection, for meaning. Growing up with absent parents taught them survival, not softness. Growing up between eras taught them adaptability, not belonging. And so, Many of them carry a kind of lone wolf energy, capable, strong, but often misunderstood. They are not loud enough to dominate culture, not numerous enough to define an age, but without them, the digital revolution would not have happened the way it did. They are the programmers, engineers, designers, hackers, and thinkers who build the early internet. They create the foundations of modern technology, from operating systems to video games, from early social networks to the coding languages still used today. They do this not because they want fame, but because solving problems is what they've always done. They were the children who had to figure things out alone. They become the adults who figure out how to build the future. As they become parents, they raise the next generation very differently from how they were raised. Having spent lonely afternoons waiting for their parents to return from work, they choose to be more emotionally available. Having grown up with uncertainty, they want their children to feel secure. Having lived through the transition from analog to digital, they want their children to be comfortable in both worlds. And in doing so, they unwittingly prepare the soil for the generation that will become the most observed, most analyzed, and most mythologized of all, the millennials. Millennials, born between the early 1980s and late 1990s, enter a world that feels hopeful and bright at first. Technology is advancing. The Cold War has ended. Globalization is rising. Education becomes more accessible. Movements. They're the children of transition, too pragmatic to be idealists, too independent to be followers. Yet, beneath their quiet resilience, there's a longing that never fully leaves them, the desire for stability, for connection, for meaning. Growing up with absent parents taught them survival, not softness. Growing up between eras taught them adaptability, not belonging. And so, many of them carry a kind of lone wolf energy, capable, strong, but often misunderstood. They are not loud enough to dominate culture, not numerous enough to define an age, but without them, the digital revolution would not have happened the way it did. They are the programmers, engineers, designers, hackers, and thinkers who build the early internet. They create the foundations of modern technology, from operating systems to video games, from early social networks to the coding languages still used today. They do this not because they want fame, but because solving problems is what they've always done. They were the children who had to figure things out alone. They become the adults who figure out how to build the future. As they become parents, they raise the next generation very differently from how they were raised. Having spent lonely afternoons waiting for their parents to return from work, they choose to be more emotionally available. Having grown up with uncertainty, they want their children to feel secure. Having lived through the transition from analog to digital, they want their children to be comfortable in both worlds. And in doing so, they unwittingly prepare the soil for the generation that will become the most observed, most analyzed, and most mythologized of all, the millennials. Millennials, born between the early 1980s and late 1990s, enter a world that feels hopeful and bright at first. Technology is advancing. The Cold War has ended. Globalization is rising. Education becomes more accessible. And a powerful cultural message spreads across society. You can be anything you want. This idea, so intoxicating, so empowering, and yet so dangerously optimistic, becomes a defining feature of millennial identity. They're the first children to grow up with the internet not as a novelty, but as a normal part of life. They learn to type before they learn to write neatly. They play with digital toys. They discover information instantly instead of searching through library shelves. They socialize on early chat platforms and spend hours exploring online worlds that feel limitless. They are shaped by both reality and virtual reality, and the line between the two begins to blur long before anyone realizes how profound this blurring will become. Where Generation X learned self-reliance, millennials learn self-expression. Where Generation X grew up skeptical, millennials grow up hopeful. Where Generation X grew up alone after school, millennials grow up in scheduled activities, group learning, guided experiences, and heavily involved parenting. They are told constantly that they are special, that their dreams matter, that their voices deserve to be heard. They internalize this message deeply, producing a generation that is passionate, idealistic, socially aware, and eager to make a difference. They come of age during rapid technological expansion. Smartphones, social media, streaming platforms, search engines, GPS, and instant global communication. They witnessed the birth of Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, early AI models, and the explosion of digital culture. They embrace these technologies wholeheartedly, becoming the first global digital community in human history. They learn to navigate information overload, online identities, and the new social structures created by constant connectivity. But just as they begin stepping into adulthood, the world shifts beneath their feet again. Economic crashes shatter their confidence. Housing becomes expensive, and a powerful cultural message spreads across society. You can be anything you want. This idea, so intoxicating, so empowering, and yet so dangerously optimistic, becomes a defining feature of millennial identity. They're the first children to grow up with the internet not as a novelty, but as a normal part of life. They learn to type before they learn to write neatly. They play with digital toys. They discover information instantly instead of searching through library shelves. They socialize on early chat platforms and spend hours exploring online worlds that feel limitless. They are shaped by both reality and virtual reality, and the line between the two begins to blur long before anyone realizes how profound this blurring will become. Where Generation X learned self-reliance, millennials learn self-expression. Where Generation X grew up skeptical, millennials grow up hopeful. Where Generation X grew up alone after school, millennials grow up in scheduled activities, group learning, guided experiences, and heavily involved parenting. They're told constantly that they are special, that their dreams matter, that their voices deserve to be heard. They internalize this message deeply, producing a generation that is passionate, idealistic, socially aware, and eager to make a difference. They come of age during rapid technological expansion. Smartphones, social media, streaming platforms, search engines, GPS, and instant global communication. They witness the birth of Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, early AI models, and the explosion of digital culture. They embrace these technologies wholeheartedly, becoming the first global digital community in human history. They learn to navigate information overload, online identities, and the new social structures created by constant connectivity. But just as they begin stepping into adulthood, the world shifts beneath their feet again. Economic crashes shatter their confidence. Housing becomes expensive, and a powerful cultural message spreads across society. You can be anything you want. This idea, so intoxicating, so empowering, and yet so dangerously optimistic, becomes a defining feature of millennial identity. They're the first children to grow up with the internet not as a novelty, but as a normal part of life. They learn to type before they learn to write neatly. They play with digital toys. They discover information instantly instead of searching through library shelves. They socialize on early chat platforms and spend hours exploring online worlds that feel limitless. They are shaped by both reality and virtual reality, and the line between the two begins to blur long before anyone realizes how profound this blurring will become. Where Generation X learned self-reliance, millennials learn self-expression. Where Generation X grew up skeptical, millennials grow up hopeful. Where Generation X grew up alone after school, millennials grow up in scheduled activities, group learning, guided experiences, and heavily involved parenting. They're told constantly that they are special, that their dreams matter, that their voices deserve to be heard. They internalize this message deeply, producing a generation that is passionate, idealistic, socially aware, and eager to make a difference. They come of age during rapid technological expansion. Smartphones, social media, streaming platforms, search engines, GPS, and instant global communication. They witness the birth of Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, early AI models, and the explosion of digital culture. They embrace these technologies wholeheartedly, becoming the first global digital community in human history. They learn to navigate information overload, online identities, and the new social structures created by constant connectivity. But just as they begin stepping into adulthood, the world shifts beneath their feet again. Economic crashes shatter their confidence. Housing becomes expensive. Student debt rises. Stable careers vanish. Industries transform or disappear entirely. The promises they were raised with success, opportunity, upward mobility fracture into a more complicated reality. And this tension shapes the millennial psyche profoundly. A generation raised on optimism confronting a world that no longer guarantees reward for effort. Yet millennials adapt. They innovate. They build. They redefine work, relationships, education, activism, and culture. They popularize remote work, digital entrepreneurship, online learning, consciousness movements, mental health awareness, diversity advocacy, and global collaboration. They turn technology into a tool for creativity, community, and change. They break old norms and reinvent what it means to live, work, and dream in the 21st century. But even as they reshape the world, another generation rises behind them, one that will inherit both the beauty and the chaos of the digital society millennials helped create. A generation born not into a world transitioning into technology, but into a world already consumed by it. A generation for whom screens are as natural as oxygen and algorithms as familiar as playground games. Generation Z is about to step onto the stage, and their arrival will change everything again. Generation Z, born between roughly 1997 and 2012, arrives into a world already digitized, interconnected, and relentless. Unlike millennials, who grew up at the edge of the digital revolution, Gen Z is immersed from birth. Smartphones, high-speed internet, social media, streaming platforms, and instant communication define their earliest memories. For them, global events, celebrity news, social movements, and even school assignments are not something they learn about through newspapers or television. They experience them in real time, filtered through screens, algorithms, and virtual communities. This generation grows up hyper-aware of the world's challenges. Climate change is no longer a distant warning, but a visible reality. Economic instability is not a theoretical concept, but a lived experience in the lives of their parents and older siblings. Political polarization, social injustice, and global crises unfold online daily, leaving an indelible mark on their consciousness. They are informed, alert, and often anxious because the world appears simultaneously boundless and fragile. Yet within this pressure, Generation Z also discovers unprecedented opportunity. They have access to knowledge at their fingertips, connections across continents, and platforms to express themselves in ways that previous generations could never imagine. They learn to navigate digital identities, curate their personal brands, and communicate with clarity and precision across social media landscapes. They are entrepreneurial, innovative, and socially conscious, using technology not only for entertainment, but to drive movements, advocate for change, and challenge systemic inequality. Socially, Gen Z is remarkably inclusive and fluid in their understanding of identity. Gender, sexuality, culture, and race are seen less as rigid categories and more as spectra of human experience. They are empathetic, globally minded, and tuned into issues of equity and sustainability. But they also carry the burden of being constantly on, observed, compared, and rated through the lens of digital performance. Mental health challenges, screen fatigue, and social anxiety are the silent realities of their highly connected lives. And even as they confront these challenges, they continue the generational pattern, adapting, innovating, and redefining the world in their own image. They inherit the digital tools, social awareness, and adaptability of millennials, but they take them further, integrating artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and data-driven decision-making into daily life with an ease that will seem extraordinary to those who remember a world without these technologies. Behind them, just beginning to emerge, is Generation Alpha, born from 2013 onward. These children will never know a world without advanced technology. Smart homes, AI-driven assistants, immersive digital learning, augmented reality play, and global connectivity are not novelties. They are their normal. They will grow up in a hyper-intelligent, algorithmically mediated society where knowledge is instantaneous, and the pace of change exceeds anything previous generations have known. Generation Alpha will face unique challenges. The abundance of information and connectivity brings the risk of overstimulation, shortened attention spans, and the need to develop profound critical thinking skills. The environmental pressures of climate change, resource scarcity, and urbanization will shape their daily lives in ways previous generations could scarcely imagine. Yet they will also inherit opportunities unimaginable to those before them. The chance to solve global problems through technology, to connect with humanity on a planetary scale, and to experience cultural exchange with unprecedented depth. Their education, socialization, and play will be intertwined with intelligent systems, digital tutors, and virtual learning environments. They will not only interact with technology, they will partner with it. Artificial intelligence, robotics, and bioengineering will be familiar companions, not alien tools. And the ethical, social, and personal challenges of living alongside such powerful technologies will define the philosophical and moral frameworks of this generation from their earliest years. As we project forward, we can imagine even further generations, those born into a world dominated by AI, post-climate restructuring, interplanetary exploration, and perhaps entirely new forms of human consciousness. They will inherit the struggles of the past, the innovations of the present, and the digital ecosystems we are only beginning to understand. Each generation, as always, will balance the legacy of its predecessors with the challenges and opportunities unique to its era. Each will be shaped by the tension between continuity and change, stability and disruption, isolation and connection. History demonstrates that generations are not simply labels or convenient social categories. They are living, breathing forces that carry collective memory, values, and psychological patterns across time. They shape politics, economics, culture, and technology. They define the moral and social frameworks of societies, consciously and unconsciously influencing everything from legislation to music, architecture, and the very way we communicate. Generations are, in essence, the pulse of humanity, a continuous rhythm of adaptation, innovation, struggle, and hope. Understanding generations is not about assigning blame or praise. It is about understanding context. It is about seeing the forces that shape choices, dreams, fears, and behaviors. It is about recognizing that no generation exists in isolation. Each is both a product of its environment and an architect of the future, carrying forward lessons, challenges, and possibilities in ways that shape the destiny of humanity itself. The story of generations is the story of survival, evolution, and transformation. From the sacrifices of the greatest generation to the quiet strength of the silent generation, from the optimism and rebellion of the boomers to the adaptability of Gen X, from the idealism of millennials to the technological fluency of Gen Z, and the unprecedented immersion of Generation Alpha, we see a continuous thread. Humanity responding to the challenges of its time, reimagining what is possible, and striving to build a better future. And this story is far from over. For every alpha child stepping into the world today, there is the potential to redefine existence, push the boundaries of what it means to be human, and create realities that are beyond even the imagination of their predecessors. The baton will continue to pass, and with each handoff, humanity evolves, sometimes slowly, sometimes in leaps of innovation, but always relentlessly forward. We can learn from these generational shifts. We can understand the fears, hopes, and values that shape each era. We can recognize patterns of behavior that recur, conflicts that reemerge, and opportunities that are often overlooked. And in doing so, we gain perspective, not only on the people around us, but on ourselves. We see the ways in which our childhood, our culture, our technology, and our time have shaped us. We see how our generation is influencing the next. And perhaps most importantly, we see how, in this ongoing relay of human experience, every voice, every life, and every choice matters. The story of generations is ultimately the story of humanity striving for meaning in a complex, ever-changing world. It is a story of resilience, creativity, struggle, and adaptation. And it is a story that continues today, with each passing day adding new chapters, new innovations, new voices, and new possibilities. Looking forward, beyond Generation Alpha, lies a world almost unimaginable to those who came before. We can only speculate about the generations who will inherit a society dominated by artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, advanced robotics, climate adaptation technologies, and interplanetary expansion. These children, Generation Beta and beyond, will grow up with realities that today exist only in science fiction. Virtual and augmented realities will be as natural as physical interaction. Knowledge will be instant, personalized, and abundant. Boundaries of identity, culture, and even biology may blur in ways that challenge the very definition of what it means to be human. Yet with these extraordinary possibilities come unprecedented responsibilities. Future generations will need wisdom, empathy, and ethical foresight to navigate technologies capable of reshaping life itself. They will face moral dilemmas around AI decision-making, bioengineering, digital consciousness, and environmental stewardship. Their challenges will not only be survival or prosperity. They will be existential, asking each generation to redefine what it means to live meaningfully in a rapidly evolving universe. History teaches us that every generation inherits not only opportunities, but also burdens. The consequences of past decisions, from environmental exploitation to geopolitical conflict, from technological innovation to cultural transformation, will shape the context in which future generations grow. Each new cohort will inherit both the triumphs and failures of those who came before, and their success will depend on the lessons they learn and the choices they make. And yet, history also shows us that human adaptability, creativity, and resilience are powerful forces capable of transcending even the gravest challenges. The evolution of generations is not simply a chronological sequence. It is a mirror of humanity itself. Each generation reflects the prevailing values, fears, and possibilities of its era, while also projecting new ideals into the future. The greatest generation reflects endurance and duty. The silent generation embodies caution and stability. The baby boomers radiate optimism and rebellion. Generation X exemplifies independence and pragmatism. Millennials demonstrate adaptability, empathy, and global consciousness. Generation Z blends digital fluency with social awareness. Generation Alpha pioneers immersive, AI-integrated human experience. And beyond them, generations will continue to shape the trajectory of human existence in ways we can only imagine. The story of generations also reveals a profound truth. While the tools, environments, and context change, the essential qualities of humanity remain constant. Curiosity, creativity, courage, compassion, and the search for meaning are threads woven through every era. What differs is how each generation expresses these traits, and how the pressures and possibilities of its time shape their manifestation. The ways we think, communicate, work, and dream evolve, but the human spirit, the capacity for resilience, imagination, and connection, remains eternal. Understanding generational dynamics allows us to see beyond immediate conflicts, cultural divides, or social misunderstandings. It offers perspective, revealing why different cohorts act, think, and value the way they do. It reminds us that generational differences are not inherently conflicts to be resolved, but patterns to be understood. By appreciating the historical, technological, and cultural forces that shape each generation, we gain insight into the larger human story, a story of continuity and change, struggle and triumph, individuality and collective identity. For audiences today, awareness of generational context is more than a tool for understanding. It is a guide for empathy and collaboration. It encourages cross-generational dialogue, enabling younger and older cohorts to learn from each other. It helps leaders, educators, and policymakers anticipate societal trends and challenges. It provides families, communities, and organizations with the wisdom to navigate change while preserving continuity. Most importantly, it reveals that every generation is part of a continuum, a relay in which the baton of knowledge, culture, values, and responsibility is passed forward, shaping not only the present but the future of humanity itself. In the end, the story of generations is a reminder that human progress is not the work of a single person, a single era, or a single technology. It is the cumulative effort of countless lives, intertwined across time, each building upon the efforts and sacrifices of those who came before. From the courage of the greatest generation to the quiet resilience of Generation X. From the idealism of Millennials to the ingenuity of Gen Z and the potential of Generation Alpha, the human story is one of continuous adaptation, relentless creativity, and unyielding hope. And so, the relay continues. Each generation faces its own challenges, seizes its own opportunities, and leaves its own legacy. And as we look to the future, we must remember that the choices we make today, how we educate, nurture, and empower the generations coming after us, will shape the trajectory of humanity for decades, even centuries to come. Generations are not simply born. They are cultivated, inspired, and entrusted with the ongoing task of carrying forward the dreams, lessons, and spirit of all those who came before. The story does not end here. It continues in every child born today, in every young mind learning to navigate the complexities of a global, interconnected world. It continues in every act of courage, creativity, and empathy, in every endeavor to solve the challenges of our time, and in every moment we pass on knowledge, wisdom, and hope to those who will inherit the world next. Generations are both a reflection and a promise, a reflection of our shared past and a promise of what humanity can become. And as long as life continues, as long as children are born into a world of possibilities and challenges, the story of generations will continue, ever evolving, ever adapting, and ever inspiring the unfolding narrative of what it means to be human.